So it is okay, and
Right.
okay.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I think this is the fourth time I've spoken at these studios, so you're gluttons for punishment. Thank you for inviting me. With a big focus at this time of year with Yom Noraim and Slichot and Teshuvah, it's very easy to lose sight of a little thing in the middle of that, which is the fast Gedalia. It tends to get overlooked. So I thought we might spend some time this morning talking about Gedalia, examining some sources from Tanakh and Talmud, and indeed, are there any lessons that we can learn from the whole incident? As with much of our history, the politics of the region plays a really major role. The land of Israel connects Asia, Africa, and Europe. As a result, it was one of the busiest trade routes of the ancient world, the route for all the armies of the empires of the ancient world. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, all went through Israel, affecting the Jewish people en route. Interesting note, of course, that these mighty empires have all vanished, and we are still here. I'm Shoel Achai. Yes. Okay, it was the Assyrians that destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, leaving just the southern kingdom of Judah, which is why people of Judah became known as Jews. Hence, we are here today. How is it that we have Kohanim and Nevi'im then, if it's the tribe of Judah? Of course, the Levium never had a land of the Levites. It was 48 cities dotted through every else's territory, the cities of the Levites. So when the northern kingdom was conquered, there were still some cities in the south with Levites, including Kohanim, and of course many of those from the north might have made their way down to the south to come to Jerusalem. Assyria was conquered by Babylon. And it's of this that we have now the story of Gedalia, because Babylon expected tributes from all the countries of the empire, including Judea. And every so often, the countries would revolt, and the Babylonians would come down very, very strong. After one such effort at the beginning of the 6th century, Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem. Jerusalem surrendered. He took the treasures from didn't destroy the temple at this stage. He took the treasures. He exiled the members of the royal family and the upper class to Babylon to teach the Jews a lesson. He appointed Zedekiah as the new king of Judea, who was the uncle of the current king, who was exiled to Babylon. But before long, Zedekiah, that's Tzidkiah, who also revolted. And here in 586 BCE, that we all know because the temple was destroyed, Zedekiah attempted to revolt against Babylon.
The bow does not work.
Really dealt with.
The bow does not work.
Right?
Hmm.
Someone has muted. Really, really cruel. Apart from destroying the temple, he assassinated Zedekiah's children in front of his eyes and then blinded him. So that his last memory was terribly cruel. And all the upper classes, wealthy people, were taken off to Babylon. So it wasn't just the physical loss of the temple and the treasures, the psychological loss to the Jewish people was immense. You know, the Davidic dynasty, which is meant to be eternal, was no more. The temple was God's presence amongst the people was no more. Things looked really, really bad. Now, the Gedalia story is told partly in the Book of Kings, Malachim Beit, and partly in Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah. We know he's Gedalia, the son of Achikam, the grandson of Shaphan. Both of them were prominent people in the court of the kings of Judah. They had supported the earlier good King Josiah's reign, and both of them were I don't want to say apologists. They recommended that people didn't rebel against Babylon, pay your tributes, and let them leave us alone to do what we need to do. Archaeologists have found a seal in the remains of Lachish, a town southwest of Jerusalem, which bears the inscription Gedaliahu Asher al Habayit, who was over the household. So he was a sort of chief cabinet position even before the temple was destroyed. Now, immediately following the Sultan of Jerusalem, the Babylonians appointed Gedalia with the care of Jeremiah, who had been imprisoned during King Zedekiah's reign. Actually, Here, read here, this is from the book of Yirmiyahu. So once the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, they freed Jeremiah from the prison. They gave him in the charge of Gedaliah ben Achikam ben Shaphan, not Yehu Alabite, to give him freedom of the house, the Yeshua B'tocham to among the people. So the Babylonians, there was some good there. They freed Jeremiah and they appointed Gedaliah. Gedaliah, they didn't want to destroy Jerusalem. They left the poor people, the remnant of the people there, and they were okay with it. They things would have been okay. They appointed Gedaliah. He established his administration in Mitzpah, which is a town north of Jerusalem, and his control over Judah was really strong. He encouraged refugees who had fled to come back from Edom, from Moab, from Assyria. They came back to Mitzpah, warmly welcomed by Gedaliah, and he urged the people to don't fear the Chaldeans, don't fear them, dwell in our land, serve the king of Babylon, pay your tribute, and it will be good for you. If you look at the book of Kings, Malachim, this go. So Gedaliah promised them. He said to them, Al tiru me'avdei hakasdim. Don't fear the servants of the Chaldeans, that's the Babylonians. Shavu ba'aretz, dwell in the land. Do it to Melech Bavel, serve the king of Babel. V'yitav lachem, will be good for you. The Babylonians did station some of their soldiers in the land as well, but they were good to them. They offered protection against unfriendly neighbors. So the young Jewish Commonwealth seemed to be on its way to recovery. However, as always, it didn't work out. The king of Ammon, a fellow called Balis, was very hostile and very envious of the Judean remnant in Jerusalem and sent a Jew, Yishmael ben Netanyah, who actually was a descendant of the royal family, to assassinate Gedaliah. This happened in the month of Tishri. It's unclear whether it was the same year's destruction or 4 or 5 years later. There's difference of opinion. But he assassinated Gedaliah, and the Jews were with it in Mitzpah. He'd been welcomed by Gedaliah. Gedaliah had been warned of this fellow Jew's murderous intent, but thought it was just slander. He accepted his hospitality. Apparently it was a Rosh Hashanah meal. Enjoyed the meal, and then murdered his host with the other Jews and Babylonians. He came, this Ishmael ben Netanyah came with 10 other men, and a massive slaughter. Read a bit about that as well. Yes. Here we are. The Yochanan ben Kareach, his fellow Yochanan, the whole and his fellow soldiers, Gedaliah HaMitzpah, so they came to Gedaliah in Mitzpah. The Yomru Allah, they said to him, Hayadate, you should surely know, Ki Balis Melech B'nei Ammon, Balis the king of Ammon, Shalach et Yishmael ben Netanyah, has sent Yishmael the son of Netanyah, Lahakodach HaNafish, to kill souls, to commit murder. Lohem lahem Gedaliah ben Achikam, Gedaliah did not believe them. Yochanan ben Kareach Amar el Gedaliahu, and Yochanan said to Gedaliah, Asetir secretly by Mitzpah, Lemos saying, El Chana, I will go now, but Ake et Yishmael ben Netanyah, I will kill this Yishmael, Ishlo Yada, no one needs to know, Lama Yakek HaNafish, why let him commit murder, V'nafotzu kol Yehuda, and disperse all of Judah, Hanik Batim Elech, who you've gathered together, V'avda she'erit Yehuda, and you'll destroy the remnant of Judah. Gedaliah said to him, don't do this thing. You're speaking falsely about Ishmael. Unfortunately, it wasn't false. Got up after the meal and he slaughtered a lot of them. This Ishmael ben Netanyah. In the aftermath of Gedaliah's murder, the Jews feared reprisal from the king of Babylon. They thought they'd flee to Egypt to save themselves. But there was a problem. Egypt was a morally corrupt country. So they had to weigh up the physical danger if they stayed where they were, and the moral danger if they went to Egypt. What did they do? They turned to the prophet Jeremiah. For an entire week, which was the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, it was this week, Jeremiah asked God, pray to God, and at the end, God answered and said, stay where you are, stay in Israel, the Babylonians will be good to you, and it will be well. Did they listen? No. They went down to Egypt, they dragged Jeremiah with them, forced him to come with them, and several years later, when Babylon attacked Egypt, tens of thousands of Jews were wiped out. So the words didn't penetrate. The destruction was now complete. Israel was completely barren. The Jewish Commonwealth was gone. And for the first time, there were no Jews in the land of Israel. What was the reason for the assassination? Well, this Yishmael ben Netanyah was himself of royal descent. Maybe he was jealous of Gedaliah's governorship and wanted the power for himself. He might have felt a right thing. Also, we know from elsewhere that the Ammon, the king of Ammon, was very anti-Babylon. So he was sort of stirring things up to rebel against Babylon. So again, politics rears its evil head. So this event, the murder of Gedaliah, has been likened to the destruction of the temple. It lost Jewish lives, brought the end of Jewish settlement in Israel for many, many years. So the Nevi'im decided we should have a day of fasting. The Tanakh doesn't actually say which day he was murdered. It says, Vayhi b'chodesh hashvi'i, it was in the 7th month. However, the word chodesh can actually mean Rosh Chodesh as well. So we have two views. The Radak says, Vayhi b'chodesh hashvi'i, kamo machar chodesh. Like when you say machar chodesh, it means the eve of the new moon, the actual day. Chodesh means the day of Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so Radak says, Kamo machar chodesh, Rosh Hashanah, neherag Gedaliah ben Achikam. It was on Rosh Hashanah itself that Gedaliah was killed. They fixed the Tanit after Rosh Hashanah because it was a Yom Tov. However, the Gemara actually says it was on the 3rd of Tishri itself. So different views when it happened, but it's an awful, awful thing. What lessons can we learn from the assassination of Gedaliah? There's an interesting discussion in the Talmud in Nida 61a, discussing a verse from Yirmiyahu that says that those who were killed b'yad Gedaliah, by Gedaliah. But b'yad Gedaliah can also mean at the hand of Gedaliah. So the rabbis always wonder, what does it mean? Gedaliah wasn't sworn from the beginning, it was this Yishmael ben Netanyah. What does it mean by the hand of Gedaliah, if you read it that way? And they said, because he failed to pay attention to the advice of Yochanan. Okay, I've got the quote here. Gedaliah harga, did Gedaliah kill him? Balo Yishmael hargan. Surely it was Yishmael that killed him. He was able to listen to the concern of Yochanan, who warned him. And he didn't have concern. The verse reckons it as if he actually killed him himself. It's a very strange thing. Amar Rava, which Rava says, Lishna Bisha, if it is malicious speech, even if you don't have to accept it, you should have concern. You hear bad talk, you have to accept it's true, but you should look into it just in case. Lesson. The whole incident was the end of the Jewish life in Israel. And the interesting thing is that it was during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah that Jeremiah had this whole prayer to advice from Hashem. Had they listened and stayed in Israel, all would have been well. They didn't. They went down to Egypt. So sometimes we have to do what God wants us to do, not necessarily what we might want to do ourselves. The various Chagim in Tishri reminds of a special bond between the Jewish people and God. Pastor Gedaliah reminds us the importance of being nice to each other, the importance of national unity, which is no less important than the temple's destruction. I thought we'd finish with a quote from the Talmud. This is Shana 18b. Amar Chana bar Bizna, Amar Rabbi Shimon Chasidim. What's meant by the verse? This is the verse from Zechariah. Ka'amar Hashem Tzvaot, so says the Lord of hosts. Som Harvi, fast of the 4th, that's fast of Tammuz. Tzom HaChamishi in the fast of the 5th month, which is Av, but Tzom HaShavi in the fast of the 7th month, which is Tishri, Tzom HaAsi in the fast of the 10th month, which is Teves. These are the 4 fasts which mark the destruction of the temple. Yela Beit Yehuda l'Sason l'Simcha will become for the house of Judah as gladness and rejoicing. Karele Tzom, Karele Sason. How can it be called a fast and it be called rejoicing? Izman sheyesh shalom, yula sason l'Simcha. The time when there will be peace and the temple will stand, it will be sason l'Simcha. So let's finish on the thought that please God, the temple will be rebuilt, Mashiach will come, and all these fasts will become sason l'Simcha.
Another 3 weeks. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's now we're prepared for the Fast of Gedalia. So we know what it's about this year, which is good. Thanks a lot. I will say goodbye to those on Zoom, and we'll see you all again next week. And I'll finish off the proceedings here with the